Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And I have been given the brief to try to make up a bit of time, so this is going to be a bit fast and furious. But I am absolutely honoured to be here with you all and to share in a little bit of a change of direction around the state of the global workplace and the research that we do at Gallup to understand what we call the emotional economy. So if you know Gallup, you may know about the Gallup World Poll, which is a representative sample of 95% of the world's population. It means that every year for the last 15 years, and we've made a commitment of 100 years, we go into almost every country in the world. There's just a few that we cannot go into for political reasons. And we take a representative sample of how people are feeling and thinking about their lives and about their future. And we ask everything from how they experience their leadership of their country, how they experience their life at work, how they are experiencing daily negative emotions, positive emotions, and overall life evaluation. But most importantly, one of the things that we study forensically is a concept that we call well-being, and our definition for well-being is a life well lived. So from the World Poll, and as I said, we're 15 years into it, we've made a commitment of 100 years. Some of this great work comes out of, so you might be familiar with some of this work, like the Global Happiness Report, some of the SDGs that you see there around modern slavery. All of this comes from the Gallup World Poll. And there's some other big discoveries that we've made from the Gallup World Poll. One of them is this concept of net thriving, and this is how people evaluate their future and their life. And put simply, it gives us a little insight into what we call the emotional economy, but it's predictive, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So, traditional measures of prosperity, such as GDP, productivity, in this example, you can see it was relatively stable, if not increasing. At the same time, here's what was happening with net thriving. So you see that was trending downwards. Another example here, if we look at Egypt, GDP at the same time of the Arab uprising spring, and look at what was happening with well-being, net thriving. We have a lot of different examples of this, and the real call out here is traditional measures of productivity and prosperity, being GDP, don't give us the full picture. But if we understand the emotional economy, how people evaluate their lives, a life well lived, and this concept of net thriving, we see something more. Now, we see this at the country level, but we can also measure it at an organisational level, at a city level, at a team level, to understand how people are evaluating their life and how they really feel, because it has a huge impact on cultural crises and how people live. So one idea that might be sparked here is, are we measuring everything that matters to the human experience? We use the Cantrell scale, so you might be familiar with that. Is anyone familiar with the Cantrell scale? Imagine your life as a ladder where 10 is the best possible life you could live, 1 is the worst possible life you can live, and where do you rate yourself today? And then we ask the question again in 5 years' time. So we're measuring hope theory. And what we're calling this insight into the emotional economy is really a bit of a leadership blind spot, because it gives us this perspective that traditional measures like EBITDA and other corporate measures just don't tell us about how people are feeling. Now, I'm going to make the linkage to the workplace in a moment. One thing that we do at Gallup is we're forensic about studying life at work and the impact of work on a life well lived. But you might be familiar with Dr. Daniel Kahneman. The late Dr. Daniel Kahneman was on Gallup's senior scientist panel. Dr. Kahneman was significant because he won a Nobel laureate outside of his field. So he was a psychologist and he won the Nobel Prize in 2001 in the field of economics, and he was able to show that humankind are largely emotional in our decisions, and that's where this emotional economy concept comes in. So in the first 15 years of the Gallup World Poll, there's been some historic findings that are particularly related to the state of the global workplace. The first big finding was that no matter where you are in the world, everybody wants a good job. And the psychological impact of being actively disengaged at work is just as bad as being unemployed. So whatever a good job looks like in different countries for different people, for some it's security, food and shelter, and for others it's higher order, but everybody wants to make a contribution. The second big finding is that in countries with worse labour markets, they actually have higher levels of active disengagement. And I'll explain our definition of engagement. It's the emotional and psychological connection that people have to their work. It's predictive of productivity and performance, but it's also about that discretionary effort and that emotional connection. And we've got a formula to measure this. So managers have more negative experiences every day than individual contributors. However, one of our biggest discoveries is the manager, the local manager, the person that manages people every day or manages their work, has got such a disproportionate impact on someone's experience at work. It's up to 76% of variation in any organisation can be explained by the manager. And what that means is you could have two work groups in the same organisation, in the same function, different managers, completely different experiences, one at the very top end of the database, the other at the end. Has anyone ever had a bad boss in their career? Yes, hopefully, no one in this room. The psychological impact of having a bad boss is almost as bad as having a bad relationship with your significant other. And that's why there's so many movies and jokes about bad bosses, but it actually is true. A bad manager can have a disproportionate impact on engagement, performance, productivity, and a life well lived. So now let me get to where we are. So the 2025 State of the Global Workplace report, which comes out of the World Poll, showed some really interesting trends. The first one is that we had the biggest decline in engagement, in global engagement, that we've had since the COVID pandemic. So there's only been two big dips. One was during COVID and one was in 2025. So that is quite significant given the size of this data set. Engaged category are those with the discretionary effort, they're emotionally connected, they perform at higher levels and they're more productive. The not engaged category, which is the majority of our workforce, they're languishing, they're going through the motions, they may be working for themselves but not connected to their work in the same emotional way, and they don't perform consistently at as high levels. That one remains stable, but the actively disengaged, and that's a psychological category of people who are not only feeling very negative about their work, but they're quite active and vocal in their negativity. That psychological group increased globally. Some other call-outs here. Life evaluation, so percent thriving dropped everywhere across the world, not in every market, but globally. Daily negative emotions, sadness increased, as did loneliness. So employee engagement, that measure of performance, emotional connection, productivity, as I mentioned, declined. And there were two key demographics where this declined the most: older managers and female managers. So for individual contributors, it didn't decline, but for manager populations, it did. Now, remember what I said, that the manager population has got a disproportionate impact on productivity, performance, and engagement of the work group. This is something that we're looking at quite forensically to understand what needs to happen. Let's peer a little bit into Australia and New Zealand. So opposite to the global trend, we actually had an increase in employee engagement this year. A 2 percentage point increase, which is significant. It means that things are getting better. However, quite soberingly, only 23% of Aussies and Kiwis are engaged at work. And that means it's such a great opportunity for us to boost that productivity and engagement of people in our workplaces. And that's something that we're trying really hard to work on. Australia boasts the highest level of thriving in the world. So 56% of Aussies are thriving in their life. They evaluate their future in a positive way. They believe that the future, tomorrow, will be better than today, and that they have the resources and the means to get there. However, you will see here on this slide that despite still being the highest in the world, we did drop. We dropped by 4 percentage points, and it's at an all-time low, the lowest it's been in the last decade. So again, if you remember back to those examples of Egypt and the UK, this is something that we need to work on as leaders. As I mentioned, highest in the world, that you can see some comparison groups there, but it's on the way down. Now, interestingly, stress is increasing in correlation to well-being going down. So stress, daily stress, and the question we ask here is, I experienced a lot of stress during the day yesterday. That one you can see is at an all-time high. So we've got life evaluation decreasing, daily stress increasing, and the manager populations are suffering the most. So that'll give you a little bit of a clue as to why, really with workplaces changing so rapidly on the brink of how AI informs how we work. We've got the jury still out on hybrid or remote working. Suddenly, here in Australia, managers are responsible for psychosocial safety and to have well-being-based conversations. There's a lot going on for manager populations, so it's no surprise that stress is increasing. And we have some of the highest stress in the world. Another one that leaders are looking at quite forensically is this buoyancy around job market optimism. So 72% of Australians believe that now is a good time to get a new job. And what does that say to us in terms of retaining talent and keeping people engaged and the cost of turnover? And these are concepts that leaders in the workforce are really grappling with. But even more alarmingly is 42% of Aussies and 50% globally say that they are actively looking for a job in the next year. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of different data points. What can we do about it? Well, we know that managers are key to high engagement. We asked 1.4 million people what they wanted from the future of their workplace. This is a global study, and there were 6 key pivots. This is past and future, but this is present and in my mind. So the key pivots were a shift from coming to work just for a paycheck and wanting to come to work for something more meaningful, a purpose, to make a contribution. The last time I looked up work, the word work in the dictionary, there were a lot of synonyms that were quite negative: toil, drudgery, labour, exertion. But I think what people want to do is wake up and make a contribution and have purposeful, meaningful work where they've got those choices. There's a shift from being satisfied at work to wanting a culture of high development. We talked earlier about teachers who coach. We also want bosses who coach. We want to shift from a boss who bosses us, right, to a boss who coaches us, holds us accountable, but really largely trusts people to do a great job. And that's a big shift. A shift from annual reviews to point-in-time evaluations to ongoing regular conversations. This is largely driven by younger generations and their need for constant feedback, yearning for development and growth. And we used to be focused on weakness fixing as a mode of development. Now people want to be strengths-based. They want people to acknowledge them for their contributions, invest in their strengths, because that's where we get performance excellence. And again, a job used to be a job, and now it's wrapped up in contribution, identity, and it's more integrated than ever with a life well lived. So these are the 6 key pivots that organisations are looking at. Out of the State of the Global Workplace report this year, the biggest call to action was reimagining the role of the manager. The traditional management practices are antiquated and they're just not working in the modern workplace. Interestingly, not many people who become people managers feel that they're adequately equipped to be effective managers. So oftentimes people are promoted into manager roles because they've either been there the longest or they've been an excellent individual contributor. Suddenly they're managing humans. Humans who have different individualised needs, who bring their emotions to work, and they're not necessarily well equipped to have those meaningful conversations that are going to drive performance, engagement and productivity. So we think maybe one idea that might be sparked from this is it's time to reimagine the role of a manager and a leader. Hopefully you have found something in this data that might spark some ideas for collaboration and conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the State of the Global Workplace report with you today, and thanks for allowing me to be here. Did I make up any time?
Oh, well done, Claire. That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. I think I'm sure people would like to ask you some questions if you got a moment to take some, because that was just so stimulating. So if anyone wants to ask a question, let us know and we'll bring a mic to you. Are there questions?
One down the back there, yes.
Thanks, Claire. I'm wondering if you had insight into when you see these negative trends, are they driven by reality getting tougher, or are they driven by expectations getting higher?
I think that's a great question. There's so much change and transformation in the world. We talked about the volatility. We can't pinpoint any one thing, but we know that having a good job and a job where you're engaged has got quite an impact on a life well lived. So the daily stress, some of those negative emotions are largely driven by experiences at work, among other factors. And from market to market, country to country, obviously that's very different, but even within an organisation, the experiences can be largely very different. Yes?
Thanks, Claire. You mentioned your year 15 on a 100-year journey with the World Poll. So I'm assuming variables change, inputs change. Can you give us some insights on some of the future trends or future variables or future drivers that you, your chairman, Jim Clifton, your CEO, John Clifton, and your entire global team, what's on the horizon for Gallup as you continue to evolve the product?
Great question. Thank you so much. So there's obviously a lot of interest in AI and how people are experiencing that and readiness to change in different markets. So it's really interesting to be able to contrast different markets around that area. When it comes to a life well lived and this research around well-being, that continues to evolve as well. So the psychology of humans in different markets and what they're looking for and what's driving those changes, we continue to study that. But the World Poll has got a question set, and then each year we tend to add different ones on or bring other ones up. It's really agile, depending on what's trending, what's modern, what people are asking for and thinking about. So I would say absolutely AI. We tend to steer away from politics, but we do still get an understanding of how people view leadership. So obviously a lot of change at the moment. But that's a great question.
Thank you, Claire. That was fabulous. Do you also take the aggregate data and then do a deep dive around gender, how the views of women versus men are reflected. I know you then get a cumulative, but I think you have probably quite a divergence.
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't point that out, but I should have on some of the slides, you could see some demographic differences, older and younger generations, male and female, manager populations, non-manager populations. So absolutely we do. And there's two key demographics that had the biggest drop in engagement, which made the global drop, and one of them was females. So we do look at that quite a lot in terms of demographic differences, yeah.
You know, you said you don't get into politics, but this wellness and thriving, et cetera, at least in day-to-day experience, we see it is very much affected by the political leadership of the country. Sometimes an election will make a whole section of the population feel disheartened, et cetera. So are you able to tell whether it's a work-related, say you talked a lot about managers and such, how much of that is related actually to work than the national situation or say lack of or declining access to healthcare or to education, et cetera? Is it possible to tell the difference?
It is in the question set. So the question set specific to work, we link that very closely to development, clarity of expectations, daily contribution. The average Australian works 81,390 hours in their lifetime. So the only thing we do more than work is sleep, and I think many of us probably don't always get enough of that, although we've been talking about being models of great health. So we can see in the work question set specific to work, and we can actually look at the correlation between how engaged people are with their work life and their overall well-being. Then we've got another question set which measures that life evaluation, where hopefulness for the future plays a huge role, and we saw that with those couple of examples I showed you. But that is where some of those economic factors, political factors would come in, external factors. So there's two ways that we evaluate a life well lived. One is the experiencing self and one is the evaluating self. So I could ask you today from an experiencing self, how much stress do you experience? Anger, sadness, loneliness, worry, happiness, joy, laughter. But then I can also ask you on the Cantor scale to stand back and evaluate your overall life. So when there are some political factors going on, changes in government, changes in perspectives, that hopefulness can decline if the evaluation of how the future is going to be doesn't add up. But the daily stress could also change as well. So we look at both of those factors.
First class, Claire. I have a question looking at Apple, a case study, and also ESOPs. Now, US best practice, for example, Apple have demonstrated its improvement in enthusiasm and loyalty if employees participate in share ownership alongside the shareholders, because there's an alignment of interest. ESOP participating companies for decades have proved to be much more successful than non-ESOP participating companies. Would you like to comment on that? Because my view, we in Australia, I was involved with my team at ANZ in developing an ESOP for Coles Myer, our largest retail employer in Australia, 98,000 employees, and the proof has been improvement in productivity, enthusiasm and loyalty as a result of participating with an alignment of interest alongside the shareholders. So it's a natural advantage. Do you want to comment on your view of ESOPs? Do you cover ESOPs? Or Apple definitely has shown that sharing, working together in a workforce at the same location, except of course females that need to go home, which one needs to be flexible in that respect. However, ESOPs where people have a skin in the game does definitely work. Now, for example, one more example is my son. My son is here today. Where are you, Stuart? He signed a contract with me a few days ago, which is a formal contract, and he's here. Now, if I said, Dad, would you come, I said to him, Stuart, would you come to Merrion and play golf with me and Bel Air Country Club a few weeks ago? He said, no, I've got other things to do, Dad. But now he's got a written contract He had to sign that contract with a particular amount of salary, which he gets, which he didn't previously have the same legal agreement. Now he has the legal agreement, and now he's here. Now, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? It's not the word interesting. The word interesting, it's fascinating, illuminating, captivating. He's captivated. Now, get back serious. ESOPs, do you want to comment on that? Thanks,
Well,
Claire.
it makes perfect sense that when employees have skin in the game, as you say, that they're more psychologically connected to the outcome and the performance of the organisation. We haven't studied it in the World Poll, but we do work with organisations that have these systems in place. And yes, there's an engagement factor that it's almost like an extrapolating factor. So you can have someone who's emotionally attached to their job, but it gives them that little edge when you think about productivity and performance. And I know we do work with a large private equity global firm that have a lot of these schemes in place, and they're continuing to measure it and see the impact of that. But it's a very great concept, I think, if it's accomplishable.
I think thank you. I think mine's a bit of a build on Charles's question, actually. But first of all, thank you for a message of hope. I really enjoyed that, and great to see Australia leading the charge on net thriving. On the engagement side of things, that's a little bit troubling, the 24% or whatever the number was. Yeah, I come from the venture capital, entrepreneurial environment where everything is purpose-driven. It's connected with ESOP and skin in the game. Like, do you have a segmented view of this data, and is there any different information than 24% if you look at it through the entrepreneurial community?
Yes, that's a great question. So I will caveat this research and say that it's a representative sample of workers globally and in Australia, in those countries. So it's a representative sample of our population. Now, when we look at more of a convenience sample, the organisations that Gallup works with, and they're part of the Gallup global database, it's a different picture. They may start at the 23%, but can get up to best practices and top quartile with that commitment. But it's not necessarily easy. It's a work in progress. So yes, and then in our database, we're able to segment by industry sector, by entrepreneurial, by different startup, any kind of sector, market as well.
Great, I'll dig into the data. Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Magnificent.